Thank you, Jill. Good morning, everyone. I'll call this meeting of Heritage Oakville to order and welcome everybody here today. There will be the opportunity for people to watch us online. So you are all film stars this morning to a growing audience, I'm sure, in Oakville. If anyone is watching online and doesn't have a copy of the agenda, they can go on to oakville.ca under Town Hall Agendas and Meetings, and they can get a hold of that agenda, and then they can follow on what we are dealing with here. I'll remind everybody that we are an advisory committee, and that any recommendations that we make will go to Planning and Development Council at its meeting on June the 12th at 6:30 p.m. and Council will dispose of our recommendations there. We have 7 discussion items today, and I don't think we have any registered delegations, although people may want to speak from the floor. We'll deal with that when we get to it. Okay, so let's move into the agenda. Do we have any regrets, Madam Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, regrets are received from Russ Buckland and Sue Hobson. Or no. Sorry, Jason Judson.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, good. That's great, super, thank you. Do we have any declarations of pecuniary interest with respect to any matter before us? Kerry?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have a pecuniary interest as I applied for and received a heritage grant.
Okay, super, thank you for that. Right. The next item on the agenda is the confirmation of the minutes of previous meetings. The minutes were distributed for our meeting of April 25th. Are there any errors or omissions? No? Councillor Duddick, thank you, has moved that the minutes be adopted as circulated. Any further discussion on that? Anyone opposed to that motion? The minutes are adopted. Okay, item number 1 under discussion items is 4.1, a heritage permit application for 344 Trafalgar Road, new windows and front door, and I think that is Carolyn. Super, thank you, Carolyn.
Good morning. Not yet, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah. Okay, I'll keep going and see how it goes. So this is our first item, the heritage permit for 344 Trafalgar Road. It's located on the west side of Trafalgar Road and is in the Heritage Conservation District in that location. So the house...
Carolyn, I'm not hearing you.
Not working? We're not seeing that. Oh, on the screens. Yeah. Could we make sure that the committee has the screen showing up on their individual monitors, please?
We're not seeing your presentation, and I'm not hearing you well.
Okay, is this better if I talk like this? No?
The presentation has appeared, so...
Okay, and how about this for sound? Good?
It's not bad.
Super. Okay, thank you. So the property contains a circa 1914 Edwardian-era brick house with arts and crafts influences, and the application is to make alterations to the heritage house, including replacing most of the historic wood windows on the front door, and to restore 4 historic wood windows on the house. It also includes the replacement of soffit fascia and frieze throughout the house, and to install new cedar shingle cladding at the rear on one of the rear additions, and to install new stone cladding along the foundation of the house, and finally to change the dormer hip roofs to gable roofs. So here's view of the house along the street. So if we're looking at the bottom image, the house is in the middle, and to the left is the 1.5-story coach house that was built several years ago, and to the right is the neighboring house, but just to make note of it, these two were both built at the same time by the Blakelock brothers. There will be some reference to this house later on. So looking at the front addition, staff recently approved a minor heritage permit for the Heritage House for the restoration of the front porch, and this included replacement of the steps and the composite floor that had already been replaced, and to restore elements of the porch, including the columns and the wood railings. And so again, this has already been approved, and they've applied for a heritage grant for this work as well. But as part of this application on the front elevation, changes that we're looking at are the restoration of the 4 windows you see on the front porch. They are not drawn correctly in this drawing here, but you can see them in the images. They're 1/1 windows with a 1-pane window to the right of the door. So these are all to be restored. Looking at the front door, it was an added sort of colonial style element that was likely added in the 1940s and 50s, the wood door surround. That's to be removed. And the front door, which is historic, not sure if it's original, it has been damaged. It was kicked in at one point, the panels came out, and they've tried to replace it. The owners have hired Tom Murison, a heritage consultant, who's looked at it and has found that it's too difficult to repair it properly. And so they are proposing a new wood door made in the same style as the door that you see in the image there. Above the porch, the windows that you see are proposed to be replaced with new wood windows. And I'll get to this on the other elevations as well, but they have gone through the process of looking at the heritage windows replacement guidelines in order to make sure that the replacements are done according with those guidelines. And those guidelines require that at least 30% of each window is deteriorated to a point that needs to be replaced, so replacements are supported. So in this case, that is the case for most windows, and the new windows proposed are 6/1 wood windows. So I'll get into a bit more detail on that. On this is the north elevation of the house. There is about a rear third of this house that you can see that was added. It's a later addition to the original house. And there is a mix of windows. There are 1/1 and there are 6/6 windows added at different stages. There were also dormers added on the north and south elevation of the roof. And those also have different styles of windows. They are 6/6. The owners were proposing to replace all of the windows with 6/1 or 4/1 in the arts and crafts style to provide a consistent look as opposed to replacing each window in kind exactly as it is, which are a mixture of window styles. They've also proposed this style based on the arts and crafts style and on the adjacent house next door, which again was built at the same time, which has those sort of 6/1 style wood windows. So there is more information in the package on that from the heritage consultant, and he can speak to that as well if the committee needs more details, but that's why 6/1 is being proposed. In the dormers, you can see they've changed slightly. The current ones are hip roofed. They were a later addition. The owners were proposing to replace them with gable roofs. This is to help with 2 things. One is a water issue with drainage where the water was not properly draining off of those roofs. But secondly, to put gable windows to be more consistent with the gable roofed house in terms of the architectural style. So moving to the north elevation, same thing applies for the windows and the dormers. On the left-hand side of one of the later additions, they are proposing to add more cedar shingle cladding. If you look in the top left-hand corner, there is only cedar shingle cladding in the attic. They are proposing to bring it down to the 2nd story as well so that it lines up with the cedar shingle cladding on the rear of the house, which I'll get to in a second. They're also proposing throughout the house to remove the parging on the concrete foundation and add a stone veneer to make it look more like a traditional stone foundation, which is especially visible on the rear elevation where the basement is exposed. So this is another piece of the application. The other windows you see here proposed to be replaced are with large glazing. This was a later, more contemporary addition, and this is at the rear facing the creek, and so that's been supported by staff as well. One other element was the replacement of some of the trim work throughout, and the eaves and fascia and soffits. They are a mixture now of aluminum, I think there was some vinyl and wood, and they are proposing to replace those to have a consistent look with composite and wood materials throughout. So again, in terms of the windows being replaced, they did go through the heritage window replacement guidelines, and Tom Yerson, the heritage consultant, provided an individual sheet. Not all of these were included in the package because it's quite a lot of information, but individual sheet on each window and photos of each window showing the deterioration. In all cases, except for 6 windows, they were considered to be in poor condition and are being proposed for replacement. 4 of the windows that were in fair to good condition are the ones on the front elevation under the porch. Of course, they're in good condition because they were protected from the porch roof. Those are to be restored. And there are 2 that were on the later additions on the sides that were in fair condition, but to provide consistency along those elevations, staff are actually supporting their replacement with the 6/1 so that there's a consistent look on both those elevations. And again, the sort of most unique and the windows at the front, along the front elevation under the porch, are to be restored. The windows and front door that are being replaced or are replacing the existing are in keeping with the style of the arts and crafts house. And then new cladding and trim materials are complementary to the house and the district. And the idea and the goal with all of this project is really to increase the longevity of the house. There is some deterioration throughout. So to make sure that the house is in good working order and all the water is draining properly, and that the materials are not rotten or deteriorated. So the staff recommendation is to approve the application that you have before you with one condition: that final details on the new windows, front door, cedar shingle cladding, stone cladding, trim, and roofing material be submitted to Heritage Planning staff for final approval. Again, a fairly standard condition just to make sure we get all those final details before those materials are installed. And secondly, that the permit expired 2 years from the final approval date. And we have the applicants here as well as the heritage consultant to answer any questions, and I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Thank you, Carolyn. A number of the windows are going to be restored, so that's a process. If during that process difficulties occur, what would be the process for resolving that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, typically we would still want to go through that heritage window replacement guidelines process. I mean, that is the process we have in place for this kind of situation. Maybe Tom can speak to this as well, but I'm kind of doubtful that will happen just because he has taken such a detailed look at the windows. But I think from our perspective, we would really want to bring that back to the committee to make sure there's sufficient reason as to why those are being replaced, if that was the proposal.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of Carolyn on her report? Nope, good, thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on behalf of the applicant? Nope, good. Any other members of the audience wish to speak on this? Nope, good. Well, we're confined to the board. Any discussion from the board? Terry?
I would simply like to thank Mr. Mierson for his dissertation on historic wood windows and their improvement thereof. I enjoyed it.
Okay, good. Was that a motion?
We all agree to it.
Yes. So that's a motion from Kerry to adopt essentially the staff recommendation. Bob? Did you want to say something, to comment?
I move that we, through you, Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the application.
Good, right. So Bob moved that. Kerry, I think, had just spoken to it, but Bob has actually moved it. So let's just take it that way, Joe. So any discussion on the motion? Anyone opposed to the motion? The motion is carried and the application is approved, referred to council. Okay, thank you very much. The next application is 4.2, and it's with respect to the property at 69 2nd Street, and that's Carolyn again. Thank you.
Okay, Just wait for the presentation to come up. Right, so heritage permit application for 69 2nd Street. Here's the house in front of you.
Carolyn, we still don't see it. Oh, there we go.
Got it? Okay, perfect. So you should see the location map showing the house located on the east side of 2nd Street. It's located within the 1st and 2nd Street Heritage Conservation District. And it includes a circa 1905 arts and crafts style house with shingle style influences. And it's a 2-story house with stucco on the bottom and wood shingle on the 2nd floor. The application includes a few things. First is to demolish portions of the building, including some non-historic wings. So this includes the existing garage, which is historic and is to be replicated on the site. Secondly, to remove the enclosed front porch and bring back the original open front porch. Remove the 1-story rear wing with the flat-roofed section, and to remove a portion of the 2-story rear wing of the house. Next is to construct a new 2-story addition with a 2-car attached garage, restore the original front porch windows and trim work, and to relocate the leaded glass stair window on the house. So I'll take you through that. So this is the view from the street. You can see in the bottom photo the coach house, 1.5-story coach house. We don't have an exact date on it, but it is after the house was built and prior to 1949, so probably 20s and 30s. Here's a closer view of the house, and again, you can see the front porch that was enclosed, I think around the 1980s. Another view from that corner. And then looking from the south, you can see the flat-roofed 1-story wing that's to be removed. That was a later addition. And then looking from the rear, so the gable roof section you see on your right-hand side was an addition to the original house. It has some issues with the foundation, so a portion of this is to be reconstructed as part of the new application. And you can see the coach house here, which is also, again, given just the state of the building and the condition of the framing and materials, they are proposing to keep that look so that it's still visible and part of the character of the district and the property, but to actually reconstruct it slightly further back. And the final image here just showing the leaded glass window. This was at one point an exterior window, but when the addition or changes were made to that front portion, it was enclosed, it was moved. So the idea is to bring it back to be visible in the front elevation. So looking at the site plan, you can see at the bottom the darker gray, that's the original house, and below that is the front porch to be restored. The section to just above the darker gray is that 2-story rear wing that's to be reconstructed, and then the rest of it is that whole new addition. And it's been designed with a courtyard in between the heritage house and the new addition, so to provide that distance and spacing between the old and the new. And where the 2-car garage is, you can see where the existing coach house is without the dotted line. So that will be, again, that portion of the garage will be reconstructed and pushed back. And there will be a second bay that is set back from that portion, and also with a different roof line, so it reads as a different separate portion to that part of the building. So again, this is the roof line showing the original house in the bottom, the front porch, and the new addition to the rear. Looking from the front, you can see the original heritage house taking up the bulk of the center of the image there. And to the far right is the new addition, but that is significantly set back. So of course it won't read two-dimensionally as it does in this image. To the left is that reconstructed coach house with the second bay again pushed back. And of course, all of that garage is significantly set back from the heritage house. On the front porch, they are reconstructing the wood door with paneled side lights and bringing in back that leaded glass window to the front. The rest of the windows here proposed to be restored, the 1/1 wood windows, as well as some other leaded glass windows under the eave there. On the new addition, they are proposing wood shingles on top and stucco on bottom to match the heritage house, but there are some differences in terms of details and refinements of the trim work, and the windows, for example, are proposed to be 6/1 so that you can differentiate the new addition from the old. Looking around the south of the house, again, that left portion, you can see the heritage house within the front porch reconstructed. In the center, again, that's set back. Those French doors will access the new courtyard. and then to the right is the rest of the new addition. There is one thing I've added to the staff recommendation, which is for staff, can come back to staff, but for final details in the windows to be sorted out, the district plan shows that it requires windows to be installed on walls so that we're not having large blank walls anywhere. So we will be working with the applicants to see where we can fit in windows, for example, on this elevation where the brick chimney is, you can see there, just to make sure we don't have any large expansive windowless walls. So that's one little note I've added, which again can be dealt with through staff through those conditions. This is to the rear of the house, so everything you see here is the new addition. To the right is the garage, which again is lower in height from the house. And then looking back from the north, this is the original house to the right. And then this is the reconstructed coach house, again, a blank wall, so we'll deal with that through staff for looking at a window to introduce to that elevation. Here are just some sections to show the portions that are tucked in behind that courtyard. So on the left-hand side is the new, and on the right-hand side is the existing heritage house. So in terms of the heritage assessment, we use the district plan guidelines. And in looking at that, staff are supportive of the application as it meets the guidelines subject to those conditions. The new addition is to the rear of the heritage house. They have continued that arts and crafts style in the new addition, but there are subtle differences in some of the materials to help differentiate the new from the old. On the heritage house itself, the existing heritage attributes are to be restored, as well as the restoration of the front porch and bringing back that leaded glass window. There was one minor variance that was approved by the Committee of Adjustment earlier this month, and that was for the floor area of the garage. There were no concerns from our perspective because, again, the way it's been designed, it looks more like a 1.5-story coach house, and then there is additional footprint behind that portion, but it's really not legible from the street. It's still not considered to be or not visible as a very, very large garage from the street. So here's a staff recommendation that the application be approved and that we include that minor changes be made to ensure that there are no blank windowless walls in the new addition, and that final details on the windows, doors, and cladding materials come to staff for final approval, and that the application expire in 2 years. And we have the applicant here as well to answer questions, and I'm happy to as well.
Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you for updating that staff recommendation so we can see that. Okay, any questions of Carolyn? No? Good, thank you. Oh, Bob?
In terms of cultural heritage landscape, I have some difficulty with removal of 5 trees from the property. I accept that 4 and 5, trees number 4 and 5, need to be taken out in order to do the work. But the trees 1, 2, and 3 look to me as though they could be saved, because the other concern I have is the appearance of a 7 point something meter driveway, which will completely change the appearance of the house as it now is. So I wondered if there was any way that we could persuade the proponents to look at preserving those trees. I know they say they're less than 34 centimeters diameter, but that's a 60, 65, 70-year-old tree. And I would think that that would very much help to preserve the cultural landscape.
Yes, thank you, Bob, the chair. We could have the applicant speak a bit more to the trees. I will note about the landscaping. They still will need we typically do a minor heritage permit for landscaping, so driveways, fences, et cetera. So that is still not finally approved. We're just looking at the building itself, so that's something to take note of, that staff can also take that feedback on in terms of limiting the size of the driveway. In terms of trees, I will let the applicant speak to this. They would still need their tree permits and everything, so I don't think that has been done yet, but maybe the applicant has more information updated on that.
Okay, all right, Bob, and we'll pick it up with the applicant when he's speaking. Okay, Any other questions directly of Carolyn? No, thank you, Carolyn. So does somebody wish to speak on behalf of the applicant? So as the usual, name, rank, and serial number for the secretary.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Terry Martino. I'm an architect with Gren Weiss Architect and Associates, and we are the agent for the owners at 69 Second.
Good, thank you.
I guess first off, if I could say I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'll direct some, or at least try to answer the members' comment. I've spoken with staff. I believe that we've met out on site, had a very good meeting, and I believe that you know, the proposal for the additions and the restoration of the house meets all of the guidelines of the Heritage District. With respect to the specific question of the member, we believe the situation, perhaps if staff could put the site plan on. Thank you.
Could we get the site plan, the presentation back up? And I'll just get it to the page. There you go.
Thank you. With respect to the design in the cultural heritage landscape, one of the things that was looked at in terms of the design was specifically keeping the large garden on the south of the property. So that would be in the right side of the drawing as you see it. I believe that, you know, with the additions and the restoration of the house, the perceived landscape is going to be almost identical to what exists today. You have an extremely large setback to the south.
If it assists, you can use the mouse cursor.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Features.
Appreciate that. So again, this side here, which exists as a lovely garden and grass garden today, all of the mature trees are kept all along the south side. And, you know, we believe that that's a strong element with the sort of cultural heritage landscape and maintaining that through the additions. The driveway, as you can see, exists in this dotted line right now. The driveway that's proposed is in the same location, that is to say, to the north of the subject property. Is it possible that we could reduce that? I think there's an ability to work with staff. I would note that it is compliant with the zoning bylaw and in its historical place. With respect to the number of trees that are going down, some of them are located, as you can see, tree number 5, which is located in the building footprint, as well as I believe that there is one on the side of the garage, but every care has been taken, as you can see, to preserve as many of the trees as possible. Tree number 3 is within the driveway space and is not a very large specimen. Number 2, I believe, is actually a sort of lilac bush. But again, we would be going through the Town of Oakville tree removal process, through the building permit process, and all things will be done compliant with that bylaw. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I hope that answers your questions, sir.
Bob, does that answer your question, or do you want to ask?
Just the lilac is a beautiful tree, and it looks very nice as it is now. Is that absolutely necessary to take down? I can see that 1 and 3 being in the driveway might be more of an issue, but I would encourage you to look at the width of the driveway and see whether that's absolutely necessary to be that wide and to go all the way up to the wall of the house and along the wall of the house in front of the garage.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I believe, you know, there's a possibility to relocate the lilac, and we'll certainly look at doing that based on the arborist recommendations. And we will work with staff. I can assure the committee that we'll take a look at reducing perhaps the driveway where it enters the street, and perhaps reduce some of that width to the north side of the house.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thanks, Bob. Any other questions of the applicant? No? Fine, thank you, Terry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members.
Anyone else wish to speak to this application? No? So we're confined to the board. Any discussion? Jerry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not so much a discussion, but a general comment. Although we typically don't like to lose separate garage buildings, I think in this case, this project is very nicely done. There's a lovely rhythm and play of solid and void for the massing, the court space, etc. It's nicely broken down for a non-imposing overall effect. The architectural language, the proportions, the gables, the slopes, the porches, the windows, and the form is consistent, and it speaks to the Oakville vernacular, and it's very contextual. From the street, it pays due respect to the heritage building, and I think overall it's a very nice addition for rather a large overall building in the end, so nicely done.
Thank you, Jerry. Any other comments? Brenda? And then Dave?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, just to comment also, I'm happy to see that the front porch is being restored as an open porch as opposed to an enclosed space. It does make the home much more welcoming and adds to that visual appeal, the cultural appeal of it as people walk by. Thank you.
Good, thanks, Brenda. Dave?
No, if there are no further questions, I'd like to recommend the moving of the staff report. I appreciate the comments from our committee colleagues and the commitment by Mr. Martino to follow through on the driveway and the possible lilac relocation.
Good, thank you. Carolyn, could I get you to put back the revised recommendation?
Yeah, if we could just get the presentation back up, and I'll bring it back to the last slide. Actually, oh yeah. There you go.
Okay. So you're proposing that, Dave?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. So Councillor Giddings had made the motion to approve the staff recommendation as amended and shown on your screens. Any further discussion on that? Is there anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried and the application is approved for recommendation to Planning and Development Council. Thank you very much. So our next one is 4.3, a notice of intention to demolish at 2108 Lakeshore Road East, and that's Carolyn again.
That's right. Okay. So this is a notice of intention to demolish an application for 2108 Lakeshore Road East. Here's an aerial view. It is a former estate of which most of the buildings have been gone for quite some time. And so what we're looking at is the two remaining structures on the site. There's just a location map showing the lot, again, quite a large lot on the south side of Lakeshore in southeast Oakville. The property was listed on the Oakville Heritage Register in 2009. It was listed as a remnant of a former lakefront estate. Not that much was known about it at the time, but we knew that there were two vacant buildings on the property. So the existing buildings we're looking at today have been vacant and in poor condition since at least 2009, and prior to that for a number of years. And it was added to the register as an opportunity to take a look at the property more and to allow for an opportunity for salvage if there were any materials available. As many of you know, there is a large fence along that line, along that property, along Lakeshore, so it is difficult to kind of see up close without going on site. In 2015, as part of the Cultural Heritage Landscape Strategy, the property was looked at, again, because it was a former estate. The recommendation was to take no further action. There had been a removal of most of the original estate buildings on the property. It was just these two remaining elements, and the consultants did not recommend moving forward with an assessment for designation as a CHL. So today before you, we have the notice of intention to demolish that was submitted. In this case, it was submitted with a structural assessment because we are not, we're dealing with two structures that are quite deteriorated, one that has collapsed and one is in the process of collapsing. So those structural assessments have been done, and these are some of the images from the package you have. Of course, there are more details than that, but this is just to show some of the more significant damage that you see. So this is the first building, which is more about in the middle of the property. Again, the dates are sometime between probably 1910, 1940. Of course, some were added later, like this garage, probably more mid-century, 20th century construction, and quite some significant deterioration. This one has a lot of rot and a lot of the framing, so it all have to be essentially reconstructed. There is a mix of a concrete foundation there as well. There was some stone noted in some areas, and so that might be part of the salvage opportunity if there is lake stone, as it's a material that we want to see reused within Oakville. This is the second building. It has collapsed, a little bit difficult to see because just the walls are standing, but the roof has collapsed inside, and the building is coming down sort of from the interior. So not too much there left to salvage, unless, of course, we can find some stone within that structure. So again, the CHL assessment was done and found that most of the original buildings had been removed and no further action was required to conserve the property. The structural assessment, which provides more details in your agenda package, looks at building 1, which talks about the poor condition of the building, moisture, rot, and corrosion with the substructure and the framing that's deteriorated significantly, and demolition is recommended. And for building 2, of course, this building has collapsed and the rest of it is collapsing currently, so demolition is recommended for this one as well. So staff recommendation is that the property be removed from the Heritage Register. Again, the intent with this one was to allow for a salvage opportunity and a chance to look at the property, and that was done through the CHL process and through this application today. So we're recommending that prior to demolition, the property owner allow for salvage materials from the house. And just to provide a bit more background information in terms of the owner's intent to demolish them is really as a safety issue with hazard. There has been ongoing, vandalism and kids and other people getting on site, and he just wants to make sure that this isn't an issue. There is no development application on the property. There's no proposal for the site right now, but they just want to ensure that the property is safe and that the buildings, don't cause any further harm. So that's the application we have before you. I am happy to answer any questions, and we have the applicants here as well.
Thanks, Carolyn. So I guess this is one of the ones that's on our list for the project that we have underway with respect to the listed buildings. That's kind of bumped itself ahead by coming forward by itself, but it's not one that would have survived that process either, is your view. It's not we wouldn't go part 4 for this.
Yes,
and
through you,
Mr.
Mr.
Part 4 for this, then
Yep.
it comes off the list.
Correct, through you, Mr. Chair. We have not identified this property as part of our designation project to move forward with. So it will, if nothing is done, it would very, very likely come off the Heritage Register in January 2025. The reason the applicants are coming forward now is just because they want to be able to remove the buildings for safety reasons.
Yeah, good. Any questions of Carolyn? No, thank you. Sorry, Jerry? Did Dave? Okay, gosh. You guys should do it right quicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the chivalry, Councillor. I have a broad question, Carolyn, and I'm not sure it's not really fair of me to ask this of you now, but just in general, at some point, if we could address it, and it's to have a sense of a historical perspective on this property. And the question is, how did it get this way? How did it get to be this way? How do we get to a point where it's demolition by neglect, I think, here? And this leads to the broader question for heritage in general in terms of preservation. Do we need to review the regulations to prevent something like this from happening in the future? We have seen so many of these examples just like this in the past so many years that I've been on the committee and in general in the community. So, a historic perspective. I know you probably can't answer it now, but it would be nice to know at some point. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, when speaking specifically about this property, I mean, I think this was one that was added in 2009 as an opportunity to look at salvage and to look at what was left, because it already was sort of, I mean, not in the exact condition it is today, but was already in poor condition when it was added to the register. We have several other properties on the register which will come off the register as of 2025. We're not moving forward with Part 4 designation, but they have materials like Lakestone that we want to make sure that if someone's redeveloping the property, we have a chance to get that material. So the listed status was a way for us to have that time to do it. There is still a way moving forward in the future for us to do that outside of the Ontario Heritage Act, just through our own internal systems. But that was why a property like this was added. So in terms of demolition by neglect, this wasn't one that we identified in 2009 as a really important building that's been left vacant and we need to, throw all our resources at it. But there are resources. We do have the property standards bylaw. There are ways to look at it. We apply that in North Oakville. I mean, a lot of the properties in North Oakville, some of them are very poor condition, but we still, you can sometimes see there's new boards over the windows. They've been replaced. People are constantly going out, replacing them, fences all around, closing up openings. It is difficult, of course, if the number of years expands because materials need to be repainted. They need to be, lived in and taken care of. And while we can do that to a point, of course, there are always some cases where it doesn't get done in time. I think with development coming up with a lot of those areas, those buildings will be dealt with. But there are always a few that sneak through that are difficult to have in perfect condition, because really to have in perfect condition, you need someone living there. So it's always been a challenge in the heritage conservation field, ensuring we don't have this demolition by neglect. In this case, I think staff, if we had really seen this as an important structure that was in good condition 14 years ago, that was something we could have worked more on. But in this case, it was more of a salvage opportunity.
So even 14 years ago, when we first sort of noticed it and put it on the list, it was already in a poor condition.
Yes, we don't have, there's some photos that were from, I think, pre-2009. They're obviously not the same condition as it is today. I mean, the one is basically completely collapsed. But yeah, they were already vacant for quite some time. And perhaps the applicant might have more details on timing, just to give that background. But since the Heritage Staff Program started in 2008, it was already vacant at that time.
Thank you. I think that's an interesting policy discussion, but and it's good background for us to think about that, Jerry. Dave?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jerry was far more eloquent than I could have been, and that was my concern as well. I'd be happy to move the staff report if no one has any further questions. I guess my concern, it makes me feel somewhat better, Carolyn, that when you stated that it's not a likely candidate for designation, having been in that property many years ago with the family that lived there. It was a delightful little house, but whether it was worthy or not, I concur. Your comment regarding there's been significant deterioration, just for my committee colleagues, bit of an understatement. I think it's going to be demolishing itself soon. They're falling in on themselves. So with that, back to you, Mr. Chair.
It's being reabsorbed back into the landscape. So you made the motion, Councillor Gittings, that the staff recommendation be approved. Is there any further discussion on that motion? Okay. Sorry, Jerry?
I was just going to, I know, Carolyn, you addressed this, and you put me in order if I'm out. Thanks. But what is the plan, and if there is a plan in the future, could it take advantage of the history of the site for branding opportunities, naming opportunities, something that would keep the historical context of the place tied to the land as such?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair, to Jerry. Again, because the listed status will be removed no matter what, it was going to be gone by 2025. There are ways internally for us to flag the property just to work with a future development. Now, again, there is no proposed development at this time, but eventually if there is one, there might be an opportunity to work with the applicants to say, is there something we could do in that regard, just as a commemorative approach, yeah, without any physical structure being there, yeah.
Okay. So we have a motion, but I should ask if there's anyone else. George, did you want to comment? No, we can,
I just
the
had a-
motion's still there, that's fine.
Yeah, excuse me, I just had a comment because I noticed in in Laurie Smith's report that the estate house was demolished more than 10 years ago. These are just the outbuildings, but I wasn't here 10 years ago, I don't think, but if it was, I don't recall this matter coming before the committee. But if so, what was the discussion at that point around taking down the estate house but leaving the outbuildings? I think that...
It was only a listed property at that time.
It actually wouldn't have been listed because I think when that CHL report was written was 2015, maybe. That's when the CHL strategy was gone. So if it was 10 years, that would have been 2005. It certainly did not exist when we listed the property because we only listed it for these 2 vacant structures. I've been here since 2008 and there's never been a building there on site since I've been here. Again, the applicants might have more information on that. But it's been, so I think they put more than 10 years because they just weren't sure. So they just put that as a general guide.
So it was really off the radar.
In any event, it was gone.
Before we go. And I should ask if anyone else from the audience wishes to speak to this. We have a motion to approve the staff recommendation, which generally leaves things, but if somebody wants to speak, name, rank, and serial number.
Bill Hicks, Hicks Design Studio. Just to add that I have spoken actually to the owner, and he would be happy to do something in a placking or something in the future. He recognizes it's been an important property, but he has no plans for development at all of the property at this point. So, but he does recognize that there's some opportunities there, and we're happy to agree with the salvage opportunities. There's a few details on the one house that might be able to be removed and used in some way. So.
That's super, thank you. Any other questions? Nope, nope, good, thank you for that input. Thank you. Okay, so the motion was made by Councillor Gittings that we approve the staff recommendation. Any further discussion on that? Anyone opposed to that motion? The motion is carried, thank you. So item 4.4, Ontario Heritage Act Alternative Notice Policy, which is that Carolyn again?
Yes, it is.
It is, good. Off you go.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. We've just brought out some of the old news, Oakville news. Got a couple interesting images. So this is about a new policy that we're proposing to be approved by council in June. Just a sort of an information item for the committee. So the Ontario Heritage Act requires notices to be published in the newspaper having general circulation in a municipality. So these are notices related to designations and to changes to Part 4 heritage properties. So these have always been done in the Oakville Beaver in accordance with the Ontario Heritage Act. However, both the Heritage Act and the Municipal Act allow for municipalities to adopt policies to publish notices in alternative media, such as a website. So staff is recommending that the town adopt the proposed Ontario Heritage Act alternative notice policy to permit the municipality to publish notices required by the Heritage Act on the town's website. So more information is provided in the application, or the agenda rather, but just to go over some of the benefits of this policy. There is convenience and availability of it being on the website. Not everybody gets the newspaper, the Oakville News or Oakville Beaver, especially in newer communities. There's always a lag, so not all people are able to actually see that news. It'll be a reduction in staff time, as it does take more time to get those notices out to the newspaper. A significant reduction in costs. This is one of the larger benefits from it, as well as a reduction in paper materials. Not much, but the town does have policies on reducing the use of resources as much as possible. And finally, looking at best practices, most of the larger urban municipalities around here have already done it or are in the process of doing it, like Toronto, Brampton, Mississauga, Markham. And I know a lot of municipalities right now are looking to Oakville and using this report that you have before you today to sort of copy and paste, if you will, for their own policy. And one of the main reasons for this, again, this is outlined in the staff report, is because of the designations that we are doing in reaction to Bill 23. There are so many notices that are required for this, and it's a huge budget that is required for that work. So our goal is to be posting them on the town's news and notices webpage. However, we will still continue, when there are updates on the website, to put a small blurb in the Oakville News or the newspaper, just to say, please refer to this website, the town's website, to get any of your updates, just to make sure we're capturing both audiences. But again, that will be significantly smaller and cheaper and quicker to do. So again, the policy is attached to the staff report, and so we're just recommending that the policy be approved, and then we'll be taking it to council next month for the same recommendation. And happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Carolyn. So we will continue to be fully compliant with all of the obligations that we have to give appropriate notice.
Correct.
And I don't know what the readership of the Beaver is anymore. I haven't seen one for a while. I would have thought that putting things on the website is much more likely to attract attention than putting it in the Beaver. So that's, and also with the project that we've got going, that's going to save an awful lot of time. I think that's clearly understood. Brenda?
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. I have to say that as a communications professional, I am surprised that this is the approach that's recommended. The town is recognized for its digital strategies. I don't see that there's a connection with any digital platforms. And also, I see that this is a requirement that the person has to know that there is something being posted. They have to go to the site, or they have to catch a small notice in the newspaper. So what that's requiring is someone to go and pull the information to them, as opposed to what happens with the Oakville Beaver, the information is pushed out to the public. So I was expecting that as a substitute, there would be a digital approach to this, whether something goes on Instagram, whether something goes on the Facebook page, but I am surprised, and I don't support this as going forward, as it's presented. I find it lacking.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I mean, we could look at other options for social media. I know they, as a whole, do not want to be filling that up, obviously, too much, because there's too many posts and information just gets lost. So there's a lot of information going out to the public at any time, and our communications department is always trying to balance that in terms of what pieces are going out, because we can't overwhelm the public with so much information out there. So, for example, every time a property is designated, I don't think necessarily that would warrant an entire post on Instagram, since that's, you know, I leave that up to the communications department, but I know that they're putting a lot of other larger projects and policies and updates on that. And also updates just on day-to-day things, changes to, you know, something that's happening at a rec center or something, a community center. So we can look at that and work with our communications department to see where we can also include social media. We still will have the piece in the Oakville Beaver directing people to the website, so it's still pushing it out there in terms of the public reading that piece. The problem is, and I've got more details on this in the report, from a legal perspective, we are being asked to include the entire statement of cultural heritage value or interest for every designated property. And those are very lengthy. They can take up to half of a page or a whole page of the Oakville Beaver, like of one newspaper page. So if we have, say, 6 properties going through, it could take up to 3 to 6 pages of the Oakville Beaver, which is a lot of money. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars for this designation project, up to $200,000, just in notices, just for this designation project. So we're really trying to find a balance between getting the information out, but also not including all that information. So we are hoping with that small blurb, we can still push it out to the public, but then direct them to the website where there's more information in terms of the actual details that we're legally required to have. But we can certainly work with our communications department to see how else, from a digital perspective, we can get this information out. We are happy to take that back.
Okay, I guess the push part, though, is the notice in the Beaver that says council intends to designate this property. And that would be the key piece of communication that people would need. Then, if you want the full information, you refer to the other source. Whereas if you do the whole thing, if there's 6 or 7 of them, it's pretty overwhelming. But anyway, Brenda, what do you think?
Just through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, my comment was that it should be a digital strategy that I agree that posting large notices in a print material that people are not necessarily receiving on a regular basis, predictable manner is the way to go. But I do believe there are tools available to municipalities that allow them to push that information in a way or so that people can either pre-order it or pre-subscribe to it so that they can have access to the information, as opposed to going back and hunting on the website to see for updates. And there are products out there. I don't want to name products, but there are a lot of products available that do that. Thank you.
Okay, so that's good input. So you've got your communications department will be picking that up. So I've got Dave and then I've got Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with Brenda on many of her points. As a 3-decade newspaper guy, it pains me to say this, but we have a lot of channels that we can make use of to get this message out, so we can prevent on people having to pull it. You know, we can push that through the historical societies, the residents associations, the councillor communications, the mayor's newsletter. My assumption is that it won't be just the Oakville Beaver. It would also include oakvillenews.org, because that way the link can be embedded in the advertisement or the message right there, and it can take that through, the people can access it immediately. The residents associations, the tax bill stuffers, whatever, there's so many ways of getting it out that I will support it, but I'd like to see more rich details in terms of how we can make sure we reach people.
And through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Giddings and to Brenda as well, and these are great ideas, and thank you for this. The policy is very simple, and it's a lot of the corporate policies are written very simply with not direct, steps for everything, because things change. So we don't want to have to go back and change the policy constantly. So the policy just allows us to do something beyond the newspaper, which is great, but we can still now go ahead and do lots of other digital platforms. So I'm making notes, which is great, but the other thing I would note too is we have been working closely with our communications department lately on how we present heritage to the public. There are a lot of things happening right now with the Old Oakville District update, with the Heritage Grant Program, with the designation project. So you will be seeing more coming out on that through social media, and other formats in terms of letting people, the public, know some of the different exciting projects that are happening in Heritage. And that's a great opportunity for us to also include that messaging with as part of the designation project to say, and you will be seeing notices in the Oakville, like on the town website, and in the actual newspapers themselves about these designations. But I also have made the point about the subscription option, which I think could be a great idea for residents associations. And as Councillor Giddings noted, there are already some things in place for that, with updates from council, et cetera. So those are lots of ways we can incorporate that. This policy is very general and just allows us to not have to follow the Heritage Act right now, which is currently just says, has to be your local newspaper. So there's lots of opportunities. So I've made a few notes and I appreciate the comments from the committee members.
Okay, thank you. Bob?
Through you, Mr. Chair, could we be encouraging people to go to the website with small things in the Beaver, and maybe have the website have a breaking news section where it can be easily found what's going on and what's new, and then from that a link to the actual text on the website. The website is a very good tool. I'm not sure how many people use it as bedtime reading, but I think it would be a good thing, not only for Heritage, but for many other things that happen at council, for perhaps council to approve a use of some of the funds for advertising in the Beaver, to advertise the website instead, and thereby get the newspaper readers the information that they need.
Thanks, Bob. Just a couple of things. What we're sort of recommending for approval here is that we change our policy of advertising full details in the Oakville Beaver. And we're saying that we will simply give in the Oakville Beaver a way sign. Here's notice that this is going to happen, more information is over here. The rest of the policy is flexible because it will be on the town website. It can also be on Facebook or someplace else. It will probably be in the ward newsletters. It will probably be in the mayor's newsletter. It'll pop up in a dozen different places as this thing moves on. We're not dealing with the specifics of that at the moment. That's going to happen, but the input that is going to staff and to councillors, because council will ultimately be the organisation dealing with this, says we want to see more proactive information as far as possible on the various platforms that are available to us. And the other important thing to remember is that the owner of the property does know that this is happening. They're not expected to notice it in the Beaver or notice it on the town website. The owner of the property is part of the process of the Part 4 designation. So they are very much involved, and their neighbours will be very much involved because they'll be finding out about this in their own communities. So the key players are part of it. So what we are asked to do today, and the motion says, is to approve the new policy, which the fundamental part of it is limiting what's in the Beaver for effectiveness and cost, and opening up all of the other avenues of communication, one of which is the town website. Okay? Brenda, did you want to speak again?
Mr. Chair, what I would like to highlight is there's a gap between the policy statement and the purpose statement, in that the policy statement says public engagement is committed to open two-way communication, whereas in the purpose statement it says by publishing notices on the town website. Those are diametrically opposed because the website is not a two-way communication tool. And the purpose statement is setting up that members of the public who wish to could have a dialogue. So all I'm saying is there's a gap between the policy statement and the purpose statement in the document, and I suggest that those be remedied. Thank you.
So are you suggesting a change of wording there, Brenda?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'm not suggesting to reword it, but I'm suggesting, not suggesting that this committee should reword it. I'm suggesting that that needs to be a discussion between staff from Communications and Heritage.
Okay.
Through you,
So I
Mr.
think
Chair,
that's
we're
noted.
working regularly with our communications department, so
Yeah.
we can go over that again.
So town communications are listening, they're hearing this?
Yeah.
Right, good, okay, thanks. Any further discussion? Dave?
I appreciate the fact, Carolyn, that that's going to be discussed with staff. When this comes before council, could we have an update? Do you have time for that, to provide an update when it comes to council?
An update to the policy?
Just fleshing it out further in terms of some of the suggestions.
Sure, yep.
Great.
Yeah, we can certainly do that, yep.
Yep, that's good, okay. Any further discussion? Somebody like to give me a motion? Councillor Duddock, thank you very much. So we have a motion. Any discussion on that motion? Anyone opposed to that motion? The motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. Right,
Sorry,
item
Mr. Chairman, who was the mover?
Councillor Duddock. Right, notice of intention to designate multiple properties, 4.5. Is that still you, Carolyn?
That's right. Wait for the presentation. Okay, so this is our Heritage Designation Project, which we've already talked about a little bit today. And these are our first two designations that are coming out of this project that the committee is seeing. And we've got two. First is the 2527 Dundas Street West, the Lawrence and Mary Hager House, and 159 Trafalgar Road, the Condor House. And staff, which we have behind me, Kristen and Elaine, and myself, we've all worked on shares for each of these properties, and you'll be seeing more of these in the coming months, but these are the first two we're looking at, and staff are recommending that both these properties be designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. So the first one is Lawrence and Mary Hager House. You're probably all quite familiar with it in the corner, northeast corner in Palermo Village. There were two reasons we're looking at this. This was already on our sort of job list because we were looking earlier at the Palermo Village because council had directed staff to look at designating the remaining heritage resources in Palermo. So this is one of the last ones from that project, but it's sort of moved in with the designation project as well. So this is one where we are looking at retaining just the brick building on the property. When we're evaluating it against Ontario Regulation 906, it has value in all three of these categories, first being a representative example of the vernacular variation of the Italianate style, which was popular in Ontario in the late 19th century. Secondly, for historical and associative value, it is directly associated with the development of Palermo Village and the Hager family who founded the village and made significant contributions to it. It was next door to the general store, which was started by Lawrence Hager, who had this house built. And it was a very significant building within that landscape for many years and still remains a significant building on that corner of this very important intersection along Dundas and Bronte Road. And contextually is important in defining and supporting the historic village character of Palermo. It's physically, functionally, visually, and historically linked to its surroundings and the local streetscape. Of course, there are going to be alterations and changes to these properties over the years, as we've seen on the south side of Dundas and Palermo Village, but this ensures that we will be protecting this building within this site as part of any future development. And just some images to give you an idea to back up the design physical value, a lot of the Italian features that you can see, the cornice with the brackets, the symmetrical look. There was originally a larger porch going off the front that was removed probably close to 100 years ago. Some of the other details on the house, some historic images of Mary and Lawrence Hager, who had the house built, a view from the rear, and the store that he ran right next door. And just a couple of street views, streetscape views showing, again, the relationship, of course, with the Palermo United Church right next door and the Switzer House after that. So a pretty significant corner, and we're happy to see another piece of it protected. The second one is the Condor House on 159 Trafalgar Road, the east side of Trafalgar, just north of downtown. And this one has value in, again, all three categories. It is a representative example of a vernacular workers' cottage with Georgian influences. It was originally part of a semi-detached building. This is the remaining portion. It's also directly associated with the early industrial history of Oakville as a representative example of a workers' cottage. It housed employees from different local industries, including the Oakville Basket Factory. And finally, it's physically, visually, and historically linked to its surroundings on the edge of downtown Oakville. Again, some images just to show the one-story brick building. Here's an older image showing the second piece, which was demolished decades ago, and just an interesting fire insurance plan showing the Carson planing mill that was there where the Trafalgar Lodge is now. And just a couple of streetscape views. Again, with this one, there could be changes. There are no changes proposed or a development application that has been submitted to the town, but there could be consideration of any kind of proposal for the site as long as the building remains in its location and is protected. At least the original portion is protected. There is a rear wing that was not included in the designation, or a rear lean-to wing. So these properties meet the criteria of Ontario Regulation 906, and they are considered to merit designation under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and staff will be taking a separate report to Planning and Development Council on June 12th, recommending designation of these as well. So our staff recommendation is simply that the following two properties be designated under Part 4 of the Heritage Act, and I am happy to answer any questions.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Carolyn. So this is the first of what we hope will be a whole series of recommendations for Part 4. And it's interesting to see properties that have not been designated that look ideal candidates for designation. So we're finally getting around to all of this. Any questions of Carolyn? Jerry?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there was a really important historical fact that I didn't see listed on the Condor House, the fact that it is adjacent to our chair.
Hardly an additional reason for designation.
We can add that in the bylaw when we get to that point.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions of Carolyn? No? Good, good. So any further discussion? George? Thank you, George. George has moved the motion that the staff recommendation be adopted. And are there any further discussion on that motion? Anyone opposed to that motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. Thank you. So the next item is 4.6, which is the Heritage Grant Program recommendation for 2023. And as noted earlier, our member, Kerry Colborne, has indicated a conflict because she is an applicant for this and she will not participate in the discussion. Thank you. Sue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess I'd like to start by thanking the members of the committee who are able to join us for the evaluations of this year's submissions to the 2023 Heritage Grant Program. As your report goes into details, this was a record-breaking year for us, and it meant that a lot of hard decisions had to be made. So I'm going to just give you the highlights of the report, show you a couple of interesting photos, and we can go from there. So on the screen, you can see St. John's United Church, who has applied for a heritage grant this year for their masonry repairs on this, which I believe is the south elevation. It's also a fairly recent heritage designation as well, and we're pleased to support them through the Heritage Grant Program. So this is the 10th year of the grant program. We are currently working with $120,000 as part of the town's budget. And as many of you know, if there are unused funds from previous grant years, we have permission to roll them in so that none of the funding is left. And so this year we had an additional just under $18,000 to give out, which was very, very useful given the 55 project applications that were received. So we had a record number of applications, a record number of funding requested, over $460,000. In the end, the working committee came through with a recommendation to support 47 of those 55 applications. Again, we're looking at priority restoration projects such as structural work to foundations, window restoration, replacement of non-historic vinyl windows with something more in keeping with the character of heritage properties, cedar roof replacements. And this being the 10th year of the program, it's gratifying, I think, to see how much the town has provided in grants over the past decade for over 215 conservation projects, which then bring the town a return value of more than $6 million. So our hardworking evaluation group met on May 11th. We did all of this online. And we tried to spread the funding as widely as possible. And that's because so many of the projects are of a similar nature. And so, as I mentioned, we always try to prioritize structural works to make sure that these historic properties can stay standing. Then we look at the preservation of the superstructure, which includes wall systems. So things like masonry work, stucco repairs, and also the roof systems as well. We don't cover asphalt roofs, but when someone wants to put on a cedar roof or slate roof, we are happy to help. Restoration of historic windows, as that's a very important, I think, conservation goal for all of us to try to retain as many of those as possible, including a stained glass project at one of our churches, as well as cultural heritage landscape features, including historic fencing and trees. And so this is just showing you the stained glass work that has been underway in several different phases at Knox Presbyterian in downtown Oakville. Here we have a property on Walby Drive who's in for restoration of their historic windows. This is a new property, well, it's not newly designated, but a first-time applicant to the Heritage Grant Program. We have a couple of, well, actually, we have quite a few stucco repair projects. One will be the Brantwood School restoration, and then we, of course, also support smaller residential projects like this property on King Street as well. And then we've got Maple Grove School, which is also another first-time entry into the Heritage Grant Program, and we were happy to be working with the school board for masonry works, and St. Jude's Anglican Church, of course, and their massive project to replace the slate roof. So with that in mind, the allotment recommendations are attached in Appendix A. We do certainly wish to emphasize how important the Heritage Grant Program is as an incentive to our existing designated property owners and also our future designated property owners, as Carolyn and her team work to bring forward as many designations as possible over the next year and a half. The Heritage Grant Program is, I'd say, the best tool that we have in our arsenal to help convince people that heritage designation can be a very positive thing. And so given the numbers that we're looking at this year and noting that designations will certainly be increasing, we're hopeful that in the future our counselors on the committee can help us with additional support and budget for the program, which is definitely one of the, I'd say, best programs that Oakville has running in its Heritage Conservation Program. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn. Any questions of Carolyn on her report?
Susan, this time. I'll forgive you. You've had 5 applications with Carolyn already.
Councillor Dunnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd be pleased to give you a motion to approve. And I just want to, and I'm sure many of you have served on the committee, appreciate the huge amount of work that staff put into the background information to provide us on the committee an opportunity to review them. Many visits, many discussions take place prior to it making its way in terms of the report. So well done. It was a record year, as you say.
Indeed, it's a lot of work that gets done, and those of us that have served on that committee just get to appreciate that. So thank you, everybody on the staff who've helped make that process so easy for us to deal with. So we have a motion to, Jerry, do you want to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank Susan for the follow-up email that you sent this committee this week, and I found it very enlightening. And I think that the 2 good tools for a successful and democratic process and communication are those of transparency and comparison. And I think you've done that for us in that beautiful email and all the background work that went into that. You compared, just to summarize, you compared what the 2 other municipalities in Halton Region are doing to support custodians and owners of heritage properties. And it was elucidating, and it's just really good to see that, and for councillors and you know, the mayor in Oakville to understand that the other 2 municipalities are also contributing, and we're in good company within our region. And so, you know, the ask is always more, of course, and it's good to know that other municipalities are doing even more. And it's also good to see that comparison and that it is transparent for our good democratic process. So thank you, Susan. That was nicely done. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for anybody who's watching, and again, for transparency's sake, if anybody would like to read the report that Jerry's just referred to, it was submitted as part of the town's 2023 budget process. All of those documents are publicly available online. If anybody watching is interested, would like a copy of it, feel free to email Heritage Planning staff. But really, it was a report about the costs and the requirements of heritage tax relief programs in Ontario. And so Councillor Dudek had requested that information for Budget Committee this year, and staff were happy to provide it. And we worked quite closely actually with the Finance Department in providing those hard numbers as comparisons as well.
Yeah, I was going to make some comments after we'd dealt with the issue. But the comments seem to have started while we're still dealing with the issue. But it was just to say I read these reports, and I did follow the Budget Committee work earlier. And whilst we have a wonderful, well thought out, well administered program, compared to, say, what Burlington does, they do both. They give you a 40% tax reduction. And I'm astonished that Oakville is leaving regional and provincial money on the table, because these guys would chip in as well, and it's sitting there available to us, and we're not getting access to it. So I know that budget pressures, and we're preaching to the converted on this committee, but I really do believe that if we are going, and we are, progressing with an increase of the number of Part 4 properties and perhaps other districts that may present themselves from time to time, that this is our most important selling tool. This is the most important thing that we can do to head off appeals from people that just feel you're just dumping me with an obligation. I spend $700,000 on a roof and I get a grant of $6,500. I mean, that's good, but it doesn't help. So I think there's a lot of work to do on the budget, and it's not as if we would be bleeding edge, because many municipalities in our own region and in other local ones do far, far more. And Oakville arguably has more really high quality heritage than many of these other municipalities. Anyway, that was my comment, but are we ready for the question? Okay, I'll call the question. Anyone opposed to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is carried. The comments don't get noted in our minutes. It's not the way our minutes are run. We note decisions in our minutes, but there's lots of ears, and I'm sure they're listening. Thank you very much. And thank you again, Susan, and the rest of the staff for the work you do in this project. Right, we're into, I think, 4.7, which was an addendum, and it's referred to as the Cultural Heritage Landscape Conservation Plan Policy Doc CX, and I think we all got it physically delivered last week. And I think that's Sue again, who's going to tell us why this is here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for anybody who's looking to follow along, if you can't find the link on the main agenda page for Heritage Oakville today, this is available electronically under the addendum link. And so just for anybody who doesn't have a hard copy in front of them, that is where you can find it online. And so the report is rather short, and so will be my presentation. Essentially, this really is more of a procedural issue that we're bringing forward for the committee for information purposes, and it's listed as a discussion item in case there are any questions, because we do want to ensure you that heritage conservation is chugging ahead. We're just making some changes to our internal processes, really. So, since 2018, we have required that conservation plans are required for our significant cultural heritage landscapes, that are those that are designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act. These conservation plans, you've seen quite a few of them come through over the previous years, provide information and tools on how to evaluate changes that are being proposed to the property in a very clear and transparent way. However, you know, as best intentions may not always lie in a smooth road of implementation. Enforcement of this bylaw has resulted in some significant legal issues, I would say, where property owners are choosing to not cooperate in the preparation of the plan or appealing the plan. And so our response at this time is to recommend a change for the town's enabling process to change the conservation plan requirement for CHLs from a bylaw into a policy. The main difference here is that bylaws are regulatory and they have penalties for nonconformity. And so removing conservation plans out of a bylaw framework will mean that we no longer have a penalty section applied to them. However, the Ontario Heritage Act still applies, which of course has a penalty section for work undertaken without proper authorization. And as that is provincial legislation, it certainly has a lot stronger teeth than a well-intentioned municipal bylaw. And so that I'd say would be the biggest reason for the recommendation and the change from bylaw to policy, but also changing it to a policy will allow us to make changes to the formatting and structures of these conservation plans that we've been living with now for 5 years and actually using them to implement and manage and evaluate changes. And we've found in some ways that the requirements of the bylaw are maybe a little bit more unwieldy than we had originally anticipated, both for property owners and staff to deal with, and through much discussion internally with us and based on feedback that we've received from property owners as well, we feel that we can make some very significant improvements to these conservation plans for our cultural heritage landscapes through the policy process. So really, this is kind of a procedural issue that we're bringing forward to because we want to be clear and transparent about what we're doing. Conservation plans will still be brought forward to the Heritage Advisory Committee for review and your endorsement. It's just that in the staff report, instead of referencing bylaw 2018-019 as the source document for the reason why we're doing this, we'll be referencing a town policy instead. And so the recommendation before you is that we repeal this bylaw 2018-019 and that the policy be endorsed instead. And I would also note that the policy document, as you've just seen with Carolyn's previous staff report, is a very high-level document. There will also be an accompanying procedural piece that will go through staff-level approval, and I believe is approved in the end by the CAO, to make sure that we've incorporated everything that we need to kind of to flesh out the policy to make it workable as well. Because as I do know, it's a very generalized document, but that is the intent of the policy, which has seen some review through senior management in our legal department as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Carolyn. This is back office stuff. I mean, we, at this committee over the last 20 years, we've tried to develop a process that is user-friendly, that is easy for people to access, where everybody can see what we're doing and why we're doing it. We tend to forget that behind us, there's a huge structure. It's the Ontario Heritage Act, it's the Ontario Municipal Act, it's the Policy Act, it's the policy statements, it's town bylaws. It's a whole pile of stuff that give this credibility, and it gives us the authority by which we act. This is a situation here, as I understand it, where the town had chosen to use the bylaw to define some elements of the heritage procedure. The Heritage Act already did that. And we had, in a sense, a duplication. And as you know, when there's duplication, then you get appeals for certain things, and you can easily find inconsistencies and go back and forward and end up making a case. So to simplify things, instead of there being an Oakville bylaw plus the Ontario Heritage Act for this particular application or purpose, we will be relying on the Ontario Heritage Act, which, because it's a provincial act, is far easier to enforce. So that basically is what we're dealing with. So, I mean, a lot of us wonder, why are we dealing with this? Well, we're dealing with it because we have to understand that there is all this stuff going on in the background, and the council likes us to have a look at things first before it gets onto their desk, because they're the ones that are going to deal with this. But I think from our point of view, and you can ask Carolyn all kinds of questions about it, it's just to understand that we're just simplifying and improving the process that operates behind us, that provides us the authority to do all the things that we try to do in a clear, understandable, user-friendly manner. So that's kind of my take on what we're dealing with today, but if you've got any questions of Carolyn, please ask them now, or any comments to make. Do you, Councillor Zedek?
Thank you. Be pleased to give you a motion to approve, and I just want to express thanks for being so proactive and having eyes on the document in respect to improving things in terms of enforcement. It must be very frustrating, especially for staff, given the amount of work that you put into cultural heritage landscapes, to have challenges and, what shall I say, the appeal process has been very frustrating for you. So as I say, good that we're making the changes, and I dare say this will be one of many. So thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So you've made the motion that we adopt the staff report, but anybody else have any comments they want to make? Good, thank you. Anyone opposed to the motion? No, the motion is carried. Thank you very much, everybody. Right, number 5, information items. So 5.1, the Heritage Conservation District update, and we all know which Heritage Conservation District that is. Are you on for that, Sue?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'll stay here and give you an update on what's going on with Old Oakville. So the commenting period on the draft study, which was released at the beginning of April, closed on May 19th. And so staff are currently working through a consolidation of comments received via email, through the town's survey, other comments, and we have also met directly with the Oakville Lakeside Residents Association. And so I'd say Kirk and I and the consultants are formulating kind of a response team so that we can as I say, consolidate the comments, figure out what changes that we need to make in order to revise the plan to improve it to meet community expectations. And we're happy to be working closely with the Oakville Lakeside Residents Association through this process, as they've volunteered their time to work with staff, especially on improving the inventory sheets attached as Appendix A, as well as, of course, providing us with some very thorough comments that really show their passion for their neighborhood and their homes. So that's where we're at. In terms of a timeline as to when we'll have a revised draft, it's a little bit too soon to say, but hopefully I'll have a date for you at our next meeting in June. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. The next item, 5.2, is Heritage Designation Info Sheet. I'm not sure what that is.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, we'll have to move this to the next agenda. We were hoping to have hard copies of it for you today, but we don't have it back from the print shop yet. So we will hopefully have it for the next one. But today, nothing to look at quite yet. In terms of a hard copy, we can also send a digital copy out as well.
Okay. So does that mean it's coming off the agenda? We can't, Jill? So 5.2 is, since it hasn't been distributed, we can hardly vote to receive it.
Mr. Chairman, 5.2 still remains on the agenda as listed. Staff just gave an update.
Okay, the update is enough to meet that. Okay. 5.3, we've all got the meeting dates for 2023, which I'm sure we've put into our calendars and shoved everything else out of the way. 5.4, the confidential committee membership list was distributed. Just remind everybody it is confidential. It's not to be used for any other purpose. And so if these are the information items, can somebody give me a motion to receive the information items? How about Jerry? Thank you very much. Jerry's given the motion to receive the information items. Anyone opposed? Seeing none opposed, they are received. So the date and time of our next meeting is Tuesday, June the 27th, and it will be here in the council chambers again at 9:30. And a motion to adjourn. Sue, thank you. Motion to adjourn, to which no one is opposed. So thank you, everybody, again, for the gift of your time today. It's been a good long meeting, good meeting. Thank you very much, everybody. The meeting is adjourned.